move to approve Zoning Board of Appeals case number 2023 Z05-917 Greenwood Avenue regarding a request for a special use for detached garages in excess of 800 square feet, a 0.16-foot rear yard outdoor kitchen setback variation, a 1.75-foot rear yard wall setback variation, a 3.0-foot wall height variation, a 22.41 square foot, 0.53% rear yard pavement impervious surface coverage variation, and a 138.99, 3.29% square foot, 3.29% twice, rear yard total impervious surface coverage variation to permit the retention of a detached garage, patio, grill island, and wall in accordance with the plans submitted. The use shall run with the use. Adoption of ordinance number 2023-012.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second, as long as it came through the mic. Otherwise, you got to read it again.
I think it was fine.
Okay.
Trustee Sullivan, thank you. So we will start, as we always do, with Mr. Adler to summarize the issues in this case, and then I'll give the applicant a chance to come up and talk, and then if anyone wants to speak on this application, we can do that at that point, and then the trustees will have a chance to discuss and ask questions.
Great, thank you, President Plunkett. As Trustee Barrow mentioned, this is a request for a number of different things. One is a special use to allow the retention of garages in excess of 800 square feet. There's a rear yard setback variation for the outdoor kitchen, a rear wall setback variation for the wall, a 3-foot wall height variation, rear yard pavement impervious coverage variation, rear yard total impervious coverage variation, and that's all to permit the detached garages, patio, grill island, and wall to remain. The applicant in their letter talked about the desire to maintain the historic appeal of the property and keeping the side yard more attractive and cleaner from view of the front yard. The intent to move the patio and barbecue space for the garages was to keep that yard open from the front and be considerate to the neighbors, keep it removed from the neighbors to the either side of them, moving it closer to the alley. This did receive a positive recommendation, 4-1, by the zoning board, and there were no neighbors at the meeting objecting to this request. Majority of the zoning boards of appeals found that the standards were met. There's 2 sets of standards. The standards for the garage, that's the special use standards. There were no variations requested for that, but they need to meet the standards. Those standards include not being detrimental to the neighborhood, being in keeping with the comprehensive plan. They felt that those standards were met. When it came to the other features, the grill island, the patio, and the wall, they felt that because of the size of the property and the location of the work that it wasn't going to be detrimental. They felt that the wall being put up on the alley that's not adjacent to residences and wouldn't impair adequate supply of light and air to the properties, being that it was off the alley, and that it would not and does not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The minority opinion was that the strict interpretation of the standards does not support the overall request, and that a conforming solution can be installed without a practical difficulty. And those are more in a reference to the variation standards, not the special use standards. Here's an aerial of the property. This is an aerial before the house was torn down, but the property before the addition is shown that would be on the east side. The garage on the west lot, that was torn down. That's where the new garage was put in. In between them, that's where the patio was built. This is the site plan, you see now the property without the house and the two garages that were built and the patio in between. Because this is relatively unique, as we know, we do get work without a permit. Typically, it's things like generators, air conditioners, maybe fences. Typically, we don't see patios and walls put in without a permit. So what we're providing here is some history on 3 cases that the Land Use Committee provided input on for surcharging or penalizing the applicant for doing work without a permit. All 3 of these requests came with a negative recommendation from the zoning board, and ultimately the village board granted. The first one was a new house. There was a fairly large fine levied that was $21,000. And that was because the house was built too high out of the ground. I believe that money was put into affordable housing escrow at that time. 828 Leamington was a second floor that actually was constructed without a permit. It was a house that had work going on at the time, and so it seemed weird that they would, when they're having inspections done, start constructing a second floor without a permit, but they did. It required a front yard setback variation and a total floor area variation. Ultimately, there was a fine of $3,000 levied. That fine actually was the additional permit fees for the increased construction costs for the second floor, the surcharge for working without a permit fee, which is 50% of the normal permit fee, and then there was $192 to get it up to $3,000. And then the last one, the most recent one, was in 2016. There was a developer who remodeled and did an addition to a home. They ended up building the garage too big and installing a parking pad that wasn't shown and wasn't permitted. There was a number of relief that was requested as a part of that. I believe the property was under contract at the time. Ultimately that was one in which when it was referred to the Land Use Committee, it was referred with a specific charge to recommend to Corporation Council on what that fine would be. And then as it turned out, it was the permit fee, the surcharge, and then there was a curb cut that needed to be fixed and a parkway tree. So they were required to do all of that. 2 of these, Vista and Wilmette, were developers, and Leamington was the homeowner, and actually the homeowner was acting as their own contractor in that case. So gets to the question of we've got somebody who violated our code. What are our options? If the ordinance is approved and the work could be allowed to remain without a fine if the board so chose. If the ordinance is approved, you could also allow the work to remain with a fine. There's ways in which we've done this in the past. Their staff could determine the appropriate fine and impose that fine as a settlement with the applicant. That would be the normal course of, say, prosecuting this. There's what we've done in the past is the Land Use Committee determining the appropriate fine and then recommending that fine as a settlement to the applicant. And then last but not least, if all or portions of this request aren't approved, that is requiring that work to be removed. So.
I have a couple questions, but some of the trustees might as well. So let's start with the garages. My understanding is they were permitted by the village?
Yes, the garages were permitted by the village. You might recall you did see a zoning case a little while ago where we did indicate that we actually changed our interpretation. We believe our interpretation right now is correct. We believe the interpretation when this and we think one other request was reviewed was not correct. At that time, it was looking at making sure the garage itself was under 800 square feet, which both these garages are, but we're now reading it accurately to be a total. There is a limit to the number of accessory structures one could put on a lot, so that does come into play. But yes, it was permitted, and again, it's now a change of interpretation, and again, we believe it's the correct interpretation.
And then my second question has to do with the wall. And I believe when I had a discussion with you, our ordinance was changed about 10 years ago with regard to walls. And if you could kind of explain what the rationale is.
Yeah, I know the rationale. I can't remember the exact case, but you probably remember we had I think it was 1713, maybe Greenwood. I'm not sure the actual street, but somebody who had a shed that they put in and they ultimately had to make it smaller. And one of the things they were talking about is that there's a brick wall next to them. That's a relatively new brick wall, like in the last 20 years. And there was a case when a brick wall was going in, and the impact that brick wall had, being at the property line on landscaping on the adjacent property, was very clear. And so at that point, staff brought it to the Land Use Committee, and the Land Use Committee decided to take the action that you see in the current ordinance, which is right now, if you want a wall taller than 3 feet, it needs to meet the setbacks for a home. You are allowed a wall 3 feet away from the property line, maximum of 3 feet in height, and that's to permit a seat wall around a patio. Some people look at that and it seems weird, but that was the intention behind that, to not preclude those, because we know a lot of people do that. And it's a little bit easier to do a wall that's 3 feet tall than a wall that's 6 or 6.5 feet tall.
So the purpose of that change was to protect like neighboring vegetation?
Right. I should say when staff brought it forth, that was the purpose of staff bringing it forth. I can't speak to the members of it, but yes, when staff brought it forth, that was the main concern. If landscaping wasn't being damaged, if they were able to build walls without damage, I don't think we would have brought it forward, because we would have thought it has the same impact as a fence, construction-wise. But we know it doesn't.
Were there any concerns with the wall in this location on the alley that vegetation was being disturbed?
No.
More questions for Mr. Adler right now?
Just, John, going back to the history lesson, the Leamington Avenue, that had been they had multiple issues?
They did.
Okay.
The full story is we found that they converted a garage into living space. That was the first thing we found. They were asked to come in and correct that. There were hardship. We won't go into that, but along with that, they did other work which was permitted after going through the process, and it, for some reason, they just happened to go. But by the time we came out for the second set of inspections, there was a second floor going out.
Right. But the other two, it was a one-time event.
Yes. The other two were one-time events. Absolutely.
Is there direction in the code on how to think about the fines that have been levied?
Well, the code automatically requires a 50% surcharge. So, we've had people actually start demolitions without a permit, and that's over a $2,000 surcharge. Yes, that's what the code calls for. Now,
let me weigh in on that a little bit, though, because we're talking about a surcharge versus a fine.
Yep.
So a fine, our general penalty and our penalty under our zoning ordinance is $50 minimum to $750 a day for every day that the fine exists. So if I were to prosecute the case and the judge were to find that the person was in violation, could be relatively a hefty amount depending upon how long these conditions exist. What I think we're talking about here, though, is possibly trying to get a settlement amount. But as far as the guidance from the code, it's kind of left as a broad range, and we take into all the totality of the circumstances. As Trustee Sullivan's point was, this is not a repeated thing. If it was repeated, we would be seeking a much higher fine ultimately. But this is a one-off thing where it's somewhat of a misunderstanding. A fine's appropriate, but probably not the same in those circumstances. It's meant to be that way. That's the way the code's written.
Thank you.
Trustee Todd?
So I just want to, are these three cases, though, the only ones we've had of work done without a permit that have come in front of the board?
No.
I mean, okay, so we've had plenty.
These
Okay,
were.
I just want to make sure I understood.
You've had a.
I was going to say, okay, so I was,
Right. We actually remembered one. It ended up being resolved. It was a pergola out on, it might have been a bunker. What? And they ended up removing the pergola, and then there was no fine sought. And that they had a grill island that needed relief that we granted, but they removed the item that was objectionable to the neighbor. And so we didn't put all we put the ones that the land use committee provided input on the fine.
Fine, okay.
Yeah.
But we've had numerous without.
Okay, I was just
Yeah.
trying to understand what
So
you
we've had
said
numerous
about.
even with board interactions such as the zoning, zoning relief needed, as well as not just having a building permit even though they didn't need zoning. We've had multiple cases.
Yep.
Most of them from, at least my recent history recollection is, most of the time I remember was either, the authority was given to, at the time, the village manager, Mr. Frenzer, and for me to work with doing the fine. I think the last land use one was maybe 2016. It was the last time I think of something was referred to land use,
Okay,
Yeah.
as far as the fines were really.
yep.
Yeah, it's fairly unusual to refer it to land use and not have corporation counsel and the staff to work out what the fine is.
A question from Mr. Stein. Does our ordinance make any distinction or recognition of any element of willfulness in a ordinance?
So there is this is essentially a strict liability case. Is you do it or you don't do it. Your intent doesn't necessarily matter. But that is exactly kind of what I was explaining to the group based on Trustee Shepard's question was there's a range of 50 to 750. Sometimes some things are a $50 problem. Sometimes the willfulness or the repetition makes it a $750 problem, and then you multiply from there depending on the days. So we've in the history here that I've been prosecuting from 2009 to now is we've had 50,000 in fines and we've had $50 in fines, and sometimes it's a warning.
And as follow-up, what were the instances towards the higher range? What would justify, we have one example here of 21,000. What were cases that you can recall where we were at that amount or higher?
So that is by far the highest one for work without a permit. I don't necessarily,
Okay.
I don't recall that one. I don't know if I was involved. But other general fines relating to property is the willfulness factor. We've gotten letters, we've gotten notices, we've been warned, and you continue to either operate something illegally, do something the way you shouldn't be doing it, or have constructed something or need to remove something. And there's that willful attenuation, that time frame. A one-off event like this, typically the fine would probably be something along the double the permit fee and the surcharge fee. So if it was $1,000 for the permit and the surcharge fee, it would be a total of $2,000, an extra $1,000 fine.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions?
President Plunkett,
Yeah.
how do we become aware of the violation?
I apologize, I don't know. I'm guessing that inspections or the code enforcement driving down and seeing the wall. Yeah.
Okay. And if they removed a section of the patio, would that eliminate the rear yard impervious surface
They
problem?
could, yeah, they could remove, I think it'd need to be around 4 feet of the patio to get that conforming.
So that would remove 2 of the variation requests?
Yeah, that would remove the surface and total coverage variations.
Okay, thank you.
Can we go back to the issue of hardship? What was the stated hardship that precluded the applicant from building it in a conforming fashion?
I don't believe that there was a stated hardship that related to that. I think the hardship that they pointed out is what they were trying to do to make it better for the neighborhood. There was, and we'd have to ask the applicant, but I don't think there was anything that said that was too, marshy of an area or they couldn't
Right.
do it in another area. I think they just felt it was the best location. So
The best location, but not
yeah.
the only location.
Right. And yeah, what we're sharing is what they indicated as. Yeah.
Okay, we might have more questions for you. Okay, I want to invite the applicant to come up, and I think you've heard some of the questions from the trustees, so maybe, you can, talk about your plan and how it came to be and where we are today.
So thank you, everyone, for your time and allowing me to present this situation for us. Most definitely, some of the best intentions lead us to issues. And this home I was actually part of building 20 years ago, and we built this home based on fitting it within the city, the historical aspect of it, keeping it as if it was always there. When we got approached again to modify certain things on the property, the next door property was going for sale, and the owner had the idea of purchasing that, adding a little bit of a porch on the side, on the west side, and then creating basically an entertainment space, a kitchenette space on that new lot to the west. And I don't know if I can show that on here. This will give a better understanding of what the plan was. I don't know if the projector does work or not. Oh, there we go. So this side here is where the new, or the home was that was demolished. And so the idea was to put a patio, pergola, and a secondary pit and a seating area in that second lot. When everything was taken down and basically everything got flattened, we started looking at how busy that side yard got. And I literally went ahead and we built these temporary boxes of kind of identifying what the seating would look like and how it would take the space. And we noticed that from the front of the home, it started becoming very busy. And then the pergola was going to go up, and it looked like almost a secondary living space home. So we started looking at what other areas could we find to give a little bit more green space to that west side. And the idea came about that maybe we can put it in between the garages because it was just going to be mulched area. That space was a lot smaller than what the anticipated or planned landscaping layout of the patio and the pergola was going to be. But after looking at it, taking it away basically from the west property line, and putting it right in between the garages, it created a lot of the green space in there. And since the neighbors really like each other and enjoy each other, they started talking. It's, you know what, if you put a pit and all the table and everything else, noise and all of that would be kind of intrusive. And so we decided to go ahead and try to hide it between the two garages. And in the end, it ended up being a very nice yard space, green space, no kitchenette, nothing like that. A lot of compliments from people just walking by the sidewalk because now they just see a beautiful green pasture basically through to the back. And then what we did is we decided to go ahead and develop that space. So we drew a preliminary plan. We sent it to the village because we were contemplating on how to set up a chimney, how that fireplace would work, and so on. So in about May of last year, we were going back and forth on what's allowed and what's not allowed. The stucco wall, when it became time to build the fence, which is in the back, we had that fence, the stucco fence, on the permit. And so the permit, it was issued with actually, I can just provide a copy of it, but this is the permit copy, and there is a 6-foot stucco wall identified right there. So I think there was a misunderstanding when we were going through this the first time at the previous board, is because we didn't see the labeling of that stucco wall because there were 3 different permits for the same basically property at the same time. So we had a permit for the addition, permit for the new garage, and permit for the attached garage. So I think between all these 3 different permits, we all lost track of what was on what permit allowed. And so, like the garage situation of the 800 square feet, we were we were approved for the 800 square feet. The garages were smaller than 800 square feet to fit the aesthetics and the historical matching to the home. But in the end, it was supposed to be 800 square feet for all of the backyard property. So the garages got approved for what we've built, and then the stucco wall also got approved for what we've built. So if the permit that was issued for it was this one, but like I said, I think between all three different permits, we just kind of lost track of what was allowed and what was not allowed. So that I even missed that part, to be honest, when we were reviewing this the first time. But it definitely is identified in the permit paperwork on the back. If I may, one more the kitchenette part, when we put those boxes of templates of what the barbecue will look like or what the fireplace will look like, when it was all boxy, I wanted to have a solid base, because what happens when we put it on dirt, things will heave and so on. So I wanted to make a flush concrete base to put the appliances on when we were pouring that. So I said, let's go ahead and pour that base at the same time as we do the wall. And if you notice on photos, or if anyone had a chance to stop by, everything is flush to the ground, literally for the purpose of setting the appliances on there so they don't have to do this throughout the years. That was totally my mistake. So I just want to say that there was literally no intention of not filing a permit. We had paperwork going between the village. We just weren't sure exactly what this will end up in the end. The patio patio area of the back, we added this so in the patio, we added this curve where the patio came in. We added this curve here, right about here, to match the existing patio. So it wasn't necessarily needed piece, because there's room to set the table and set the couches. But so I went ahead and I literally just said, why don't we add an arched patio to match the existing one as if it was built back then. And that's what basically took us over the yard setback. The last point that I'm going to make, and thank you for the time of it, the west side property had a lot more square footage allowable for impervious. So we shrunk that and tried to put it in between the two garages. So the patio became smaller, and everything that was planned for the two big areas that I have on there on the west side property. So we shrunk everything and put it all between the garages, basically for what I just stated, for the reasons of it. But I just want to say there was literally no intention of mischief, because we had inspectors come in, we had things drawn and going back and forth with the village as well. Plus, I have a permit right now to make sure that everything for the generator and the moving of the items would reflect that review and permitted process. So.
We might need to follow up with Mr. Adler, but do we have some questions for the applicant?
Would you
I've
mind
got a
putting the
couple.
permit back? I didn't, it's hard to read because the print's so small. Where does it say that the stucco wall is approved? I see a check mark in detached garage.
Yeah, so this is the new detached garage construction, and within the detached garage the permit is like 30 pages long. So I took out the couple of the pages that we noticed the writing on, but under that permit the file has multiple pages plus entire civil drawing, which is this one.
Yes.
So this is part of that permit packet that was approved, and in that where it's circled, I can send this for, but it basically what it states is stucco wall 6 feet high.
Yeah, I understand that it was in the packet, but I'm looking at the permit, and there are a lot of little boxes that can be checked, and I don't see one checked that says the wall's okay. So it might have been in your plans, but I don't see anything in the permit that says wall is okay.
And I think Mr. Adler, I think it's really probably up to Mr. Adler to clarify this, and,
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
try to clarify. I believe this is an engineering drawing, and the planning staff isn't looking at the engineering drawing for something like fencing or a wall, and we would expect that to be a separate permit. I would have to look into this further, but it appears to be the sort of the engineering drawing.
Yes.
And we've got this plan, but it shows something there. It doesn't indicate what it is. This is the plan that shows the garage as it was constructed. So I'm not saying that it doesn't show that there, but that's not something that the planner would have seen to be able to call out, because it's on the document that would go to the engineering staff to make sure the grading and drainage is working.
But this, the civil engineering drawings were included in the permit packet for the garage.
Right, no, I understand that. I'm just saying we would have to look at what the site plan showed, because that's what the.
I see.
Right, and I'm looking at one here, which seems to show the garage as constructed, and this.
It's attached, yeah.
Yeah, this does not indicate any sort of,
Wall.
type of wall. Again, I understand what you're saying, that there was information given, it was indicated.
Yeah.
I understand that. We wouldn't necessarily have seen that. That's,
Yeah.
I guess, what I'm thinking without looking into it further.
And is there a permit for the regular fence that was referred in
No,
the last?
we couldn't find a permit for the regular fence.
So there's no
Right.
permit for a fence or a
Right.
wall?
Again, unless they believe that because it was on the engineering drawings. But yeah, we couldn't find a separate permit for a fence.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so what we've drawn when we were doing the whole garage setup, we've indicated the generator there, the stucco fencing there, and the two garages, and that was part of the permit packet that was filed and returned approved. But because I think we have 3 different permits in all of that, in that area, I don't know how else I could interpret that, to be honest, because the whole reason why we put that on there, we draw it on there, that's what we're going to build, what's on the plan. And so we took it as an approved plan. I did not know that we would need to apply for another permit to just do the fence.
You mentioned calling in the previous meeting, calling to talk about the move from a fence to a wall.
Yeah, I called in the distance from the property line. Yes.
Prior to making these plans?
So when we looked at this, there was no specific distance that we needed to be. So when I called in, and so we were told that it's not 6 inches where a typical fence would go. It would be 12 inches from the property line, which I think we're at 14 or 15 inches from the property line.
And that was
Based on
reflected-
this.
And that's reflected in this?
Correct.
So that call was prior to this?
The call was during that, because this was already issued before we started demolition. So this was issued before any of the works started. And when we were going through this, we were identifying where do we put the fence, how does it connect to the garages, and as over the years, at every inch of being in a setback is a bad thing, obviously. So I wanted to make sure where we have it. So I personally called while our project manager was on site, and we were identifying multiple points on the in the alley to make sure that wall stays outside of the setback line.
Just really quickly,
Yes.
I don't know who you talked to. We don't require any setback for a fence. There's no 6-inch setback for a fence.
No.
And a wall would have to be So I'm not saying you didn't call, I just don't know who you would have talked to, because we don't even require a setback for a normal fence.
You mean, I was told that it has to be 6 inches off the property line,
does
no?
not.
No, it often sits right on the property line.
Yeah,
Excuse me, are you working with a contractor?
I'm sorry?
Are you working with a contractor, or are you the?
This was, I'm the general contractor and design, and the applicant, and then the contractor was a concrete contractor.
So
But
you're
when
the-
when it comes to things like this, I always like to double, triple check things, because once you pour, taking all of that out is, a huge task. So that was one of the items, because it on the plan itself doesn't identify how far off the property line it has to be.
You have any more questions?
I do. So I just want to be clear on this, because watching the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting, you stated at that meeting that you had a fence permit, and that you didn't realize that changing the fence to a wall would require a different permit. And that was what you said at the ZBA meeting. Is that not true?
No, that is true.
I
On
just
one
thought I
of
heard
the
you didn't have a fence permit.
one of the permits, on one of the permits, it showed a fence, cedar fencing. There are 3 different permits. We didn't realize that we had one permit that already had the stucco wall on it until after the
So
discussions.
what permit had a 6-foot fence?
Yes.
I think there's,
Maybe let's clarify.
Yeah.
When you say permit, I think you mean permit application. I mean, not what you got back from the village.
Right.
Right.
But
So-
you're talking about things that you might have submitted?
I'll just
Okay,
clarify.
Yeah.
As far as the village, there's a separate fence permit application. This is not the application for a fence. There's a separate application. We don't have a separate application. Whether they drew a fence on a site plan or an engineering plan, that would not be, there is a separate permit. The building permit is not the permit to get a fence. As I think Trustee Kennedy pointed out, there's no fence indicated on that permit. There's a separate permit for a fence.
right. So I think there's some confusion here about whether simply submitting plans and getting a permit back means that everything on that plan is permitted. I don't believe that's how it works. And Mr. Adler can confirm that. The only things that are permitted when you get a permit is what it says on the permit, not what you submitted in the application.
Yeah, we would take a separate permit for that. I think again, some confusion is it appears, and this doesn't appear to be the one where how the garage was built, but it appears that, this indicates, and this appears to be done by Daniel Carini, who does engineering plans. And again, I understand
No,
what
I
you're
understand.
saying. I'm just saying that's not what we would have looked at.
Right.
But
Yeah, so I definitely did not know it would require a separate fence permit. We literally just went by the plans that we have received as approved, because there's obviously the fencing would go in between the 2 garages that we have drawn in there. So it definitely my mistake for not knowing that we would need another permit for the fence.
Yeah, again, just because you submit an application with elements on it and you get a permit back, that does not mean that every element in the plan that you submitted has been approved. The permit only relates to what it says in the permit is permitted.
Yeah, I guess that's my
Yeah, no, I understand.
total. I have no idea. Yeah.
All right, Trustee Barrow?
A follow-up from Trustee Kennedy's question. Did you draw that drawing?
The civil engineer, Dan Crini and Company.
He did that drawing.
Yes.
And was he involved in the construction of your house some years ago? Was that the same contractor
He was
that
the
you used?
original engineer about 18 years ago. Yes.
So should we assume that he was familiar with the need to follow Wilmette zoning codes? This you've hired professionals, and
Yes.
they've made professional drawings, and all of these nonconformities are the result of just inadvertence? Was he just unaware of our code, or how did, what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
my arms around is, how do nonconformities of this extent come about?
It's a good question. Yeah, we do hire professionals that work with this. Ultimately, I think it just, it ends up being our responsibility.
Did you make a decision on the fly? Make
No.
make the patio this size, or put the wall of this type in this location?
No, the wall, that was the intent, to put the stucco wall from the original plans. I made a mistake of not knowing that I need to, perhaps if I had another permit that would just say for fencing, maybe that's when the discussion and the issues would have arose, and we would find a solution to it. I took it as an approved plan that included the fence between the two garages from there. As for him, or that company not knowing the code of it, I don't know. I wish they did, and I wish that didn't go on there, or at least be brought back, say, hey, you can't put a stucco wall, at this point or at that height. Maybe he was going by an old ordinance or old code. I have no idea. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
All right, thank you. And I mean, I think we should have a discussion to kind of clarify some of the issues, but I do want to ask if there's anybody in the audience that would like to speak on this application? No. So have a seat. We might have some questions for
And
you.
just to be clear, the owner is not here, is that right?
No, he was ready for the previous. We got rescheduled to today from the previous one. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm just going to start by trying to simplify this and ask trustees a few little straw polls here on where we stand and what we might need more information on. Okay, so breaking this down, I think, obviously, mistakes were made, and we are where we are. And so the question is, are we going to allow this or not? And we can go back and forth about how this happened. I think we tried to get as good of an understanding as we can. I think I'll start with the simplest one, the variation or the special use for the garages. I think we did permit that, so I'm going to guess that we're okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're not happy with it.
We're not
but
happy with it, but, okay.
But that's our doing.
That's our
That's our
fault,
doing.
so.
Okay, so we will cross that off the list. The kitchen, I think that is a very, very small ask. And moving that would be burdensome. So I'm going to ask if anybody feels the need to, we can talk about a fine later, but in terms of moving that, I think I got to look at my numbers here, but that was a very small.
A 0.16.
0.16. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Dodd. Okay.
Rear, yeah.
Do we have 4 votes to keep the kitchen where it is?
Right, I don't think I'd be entirely comfortable that the zoning board, if they were looking at this from the beginning rather than as constructed, would actually find that a hardship. That said, yeah, 0.16 is, I think, of no moment.
Okay.
And I would also add, they could have put a side yard. This is a better place. I would have taken that as an improvement to the whole project. Hardship, I don't know, but improvement.
And that was permitted, I take it, or not?
No.
No.
No, but I
Was
think
built
the
without
lo-
any permit at all, right?
Right. Okay, now, onto the patio. So we are about 22 square feet over on the archway for the patio. In my opinion, it's inappropriate there, and the patio is obviously a lot smaller than it would have been in the side yard. But I just want to see if this is something that we need to discuss further, or how do trustees feel about that overage on the patio size? Okay.
I
Trustee?
think it's incumbent upon us to try to reduce the number of variations in a circumstance like this. There's zero hardship here. I'm not in favor of keeping some that, to me, this is a place that we should look to reduce the number of variations required here. And I take not getting a permit for this really seriously. I can't stress that enough. I'm the one who pulled it off the consent agenda. We have a whole department that spends time and energy helping residents to comply with zoning ordinances, to help them figure out how to make things work. And so I take doing this extent of work without a permit really seriously.
I'm just going to suggest if they came in and asked for a few more feet on the patio to match the design, knowing that it was going to be a lot smaller of a patio than they could have built in the side yard, there's a very good chance that would have been approved from the get-go. So I don't think that extra few feet on the patio to match the design of the house is that grave. That doesn't mean that they should have worked without a permit. That doesn't mean that that couldn't be something that we consider in a fine. So that's my
Can I just add one
opinion.
thing to that
Yeah.
too, though? Because this is not a use that runs with the use. That because we give it a variation, anything additional by this owner or a subsequent owner can be built in the side yard. So the fact that they have this beautiful side yard, which I absolutely appreciate that they have this, it's great. But that is not a forever condition. So that just because they have a lot of pervious surface on the side yard now, if we grant a variation here, that variation stays.
So the variations run with the land.
That's what
Any variation runs with the land, no matter who the owner of the
Correct.
property is. The
That's what
special
I'm-
use, which is that extra one, is the
I understand
difference.
that. I'm saying, as opposed to the garage, which if it was torn down, you couldn't rebuild it the same because it's a use that runs with the use.
Right.
A variation, the reason it's harder to get in some ways is because it lasts forever with the land.
It stays with the land as long as
Correct.
it's not
So that
abandoned.
just because this owner has this beautiful side
Yeah,
yard,
you're right.
a sport court or something else could go in there to reduce the pervious surface. So we just, in my opinion, should take that into consideration when we allow this variance in the backyard.
But I still think you would have, if you did build anything further in the side yard, you would have to take a look at the impervious surface of the whole lot. No? Okay.
Can we limit that in approval?
We can condition that, well, someone could apply. They can always apply, but we can put in the conditions that, while you may apply, you're probably not going to get it. Right? We can never stop someone from applying for any kind of land use. But we can make a determination that if you want this, it's a trade-off. The condition is that you're not going to come back and we're not going to approve the expansion of any other particular impervious surface.
Well,
But
to what extent? I mean,
Exactly.
this is only 22 feet we're talking about.
Exactly.
I mean,
Someone
it's
could come in-
obviously, I mean, are you talking about an offset?
it could be.
Okay.
We've done
Mr.
that
Adler?
before.
Okay.
We've done the offsets before.
It's actually
Yeah.
138 because there's two variations on the impervious. So, what I would say is if we did put a condition and somebody wanted to, if they remove that 138 square feet and bring that into conformity, then they no longer have that variation and that condition would be able to go away. So if a future owner decided this is not where they wanted the patio and we put that condition on it and the current applicant's willing to accept that condition, a future applicant could remove the square footage and eliminate that variation.
Yeah, once the variation is abandoned, then it would no longer be.
Right, so that,
you wouldn't
and
get it back.
again, there's a total impervious surface coverage of 138.99 square feet also. That's what it also includes the garages in it too, so that includes everything.
Okay, the garages that were permitted. I
Right.
just meant, right now, the side yard is a lovely green space. If something were to be built in that, or they wanted to build something there in the future, how would we view that? So I guess, Mr. Adler, I have a question. Don't sit down yet.
Maybe sit there.
Right?
Sorry, yes, currently the only limitation we have is in the combined required interior side yards. And when you take those together, it's 60% coverage. Now, there's things that we're looking at with the Land Use Committee to do with sport courts and how we eliminate those going into the buildable area, which most likely would have an impact on this property. But that wouldn't stop somebody from putting, as long as it meets grading and drainage and engineering, it wouldn't stop somebody from putting a large patio off the side of this home if they so choose.
Right.
But we,
And we can't, just to get to what President Plunkett was saying, and we can't put any, as if we were to approve this now, we can't put any stipulations such that that couldn't happen less the 138. I think that's what we're trying to get to, because I wanted to say I concur with President Plunkett that I do think a little bit, if this were to come in front of the zoning board without a permit, I recognize the fence issue, but, recognizing that there is a significant amount of impervious surface that has been added as a result of this, I'm not convinced that the zoning board wouldn't approve it. And if it came into the front of the village board without it being built, I'm not convinced at a minimum that I would have approved it. So I do, what? That I would have.
That you would have, or you would
I would have allowed this if it
You
came.
would have, okay.
I would have allowed this. I'm concurring with. Maybe I stated that wrong.
Yeah,
I
that's right,
apologize.
just the negatives.
we would have this
but-
discussion, though, about whether or not we can limit the
Yeah,
size.
so I think what we're asking, John, is can we, if we're going piece by piece, but if we were to approve this 138 or whatever, can we put it such that that 138 can't be added to the side yard? Is it even feasible? I think that's what you were getting at, President Plunkett,
So
correct?
we have done offsets in the past.
Yep.
I think we've done it once, maybe twice.
Okay.
So you would say you're over your 138, you would have to give up 138 somewhere else, or not, or any other application would have to eat into that 138.
Right.
I think it was difficult for us to manage.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It is
And that's
difficult
part
to
of-
manage.
That's why we
I
don't
think-
do it very often.
I think we have to rely on I'm not sure we feel comfortable with that, but we have to rely on the resident and to abide by that.
Mr.
Just
Adler,
drafting it?
if they were building a patio in the side yard, where that house used to be, how much larger could it be?
I mean, they could put a large patio there. I don't think somebody would choose to do that, but they could. There's the standards that have to be met, but I wouldn't, this used to have a large house on it. I don't think staff is concerned about grading or drainage in this in any way, and I think we don't necessarily need to focus on that. We can focus on the standards and whether we believe they're met, or whether we believe that because this was installed that, we should allow it with a fine. But from a staff point of view, I would, rather not see a condition, because again, it's something that we have to keep track of, and it's for such it's 138 square feet on a lot that's, fairly large.
So maybe President Plunkett, you could see how many people would agree to accept this, just going piece by piece, sorry.
Good idea. So how many votes on the?
Can I just
yeah.
say something? So it just seems to me that when we get to that curve, now we're talking about a total on-site improvisation that never appeared on anything. There could never have been a mistake as to whether it was permitted.
Well, we could talk about a fine later for acting without a permit. I think the question now is, are we going to allow this?
And we might have to talk about the fence, the wall separately. We're not quite.
All separately, yes.
We're not at the wall yet.
We're not at the
No,
wall
but
yet. I was trying to break this down.
Right.
Right.
We're philosophical on whether or not we're trying to figure out what we would have done if it was done correctly, or if there's a punitive for just not doing it correctly, I guess,
Right.
or which
Right.
order it comes in.
And if you want to talk about the wall in conjunction with this patio, that's fine. I just thought it was easier to break it up.
It is easier to break it up.
Okay, so because this was approved by the zoning board, we need 4 votes. Okay, so do we have 4 votes to keep the patio configuration as is? 1, 2, 3.
I don't think there's a hardship anywhere here. So,
But when I know we're not talking about a hardship, but if they had come before us to
If they had-
say, listen, we're not building anything in this side
if-
yard, and we're shrinking this patio, and,
If
we're
they-
talking a few more feet here to make this look in conformity with the,
and if they had come with this request, we would ask what the hardship was, and I don't think they'd be able to demonstrate any hardship whatsoever.
I think the hardship would be that they are confined to this area to hide it from the public, and that this is the preferred location, and it's a lot smaller than what they could build. I mean, it's only, I mean, I know we're talking about 100 and some square feet, but that is the wall, I mean, the patio itself, which we're talking about solely right now, is only 22 square feet.
Right. Yep.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, Trustee Kennedy?
No.
No? Trustee Sullivan? No? Okay, so doesn't look like the patio. Okay, now the wall. I mean, obviously, we can talk about a fine. How do we feel about keeping the wall? Can we just do a straw poll and then we can discuss it? Wall, keep? Trustee Jaya?
I've really gone back and forth on the wall, but I am prepared to let them keep the wall after the discussion tonight.
Okay.
I just, at some point, I do think walls and fences to me are not the same thing.
Right.
So I'm just going to put that on the record. I don't think in the community we should treat walls and fences as the same thing at all.
Okay. Wall vote.
I
Keep
would
the wall.
vote to keep the wall. I don't know if this was inadvertent. I don't know if this was intentional. Simply can't tell from this. I do think our approach to these things encourages intentional ignorance, intentional avoidance of our zoning code, because it appears to be far easier to build and construct and then come in and pay the permit fee and a modest fine rather than take your chances with the zoning board. That said, I would favor keeping the wall given its location, and then we can talk about what the appropriate fine or penalty might be for these several nonconformities.
Okay.
I have to say, Trustee Farrow, Trustee Jaya, I'm a little surprised by that. Just, you maybe kind of convinced me the other way, which is, and I guess I'm trying to clarify your difference between fences and walls. In my mind, it's very clear, I would hope, to most developers and contractors and landscapers that you need a fence permit. And I believe that this applicant indicated that he thought the wall was like a fence, maybe. And so I think I'm leaning toward, well, that's very clear that people should know you need a fence permit to do this. That's not how I came in. So I'm kind of looking to you two to kind of help me understand how you're okay with this, but not just because you talked me into something differently.
For me, it came down, I don't know if other trustees want to speak before I.
Well, you can
Trustee
answer
Shepherd, did you
Trustee
want to?
Dodd's question.
She asked you a question.
Okay, so for me, it came down to hearing some of the conversation tonight and also a conversation with Mr. Adler, trying to understand this case on the location of the wall, why we treat walls and walls and fences differently in terms of the damage that they do, where this wall is located along an alley and not having impacted trees, not having impacted other vegetation. We don't have a neighbor complaint. So for me, it really is this specific wall and where it happens to be. And it's not the entire length of the back of the property. It's not walling in the entire, in fact, the property is quite open. So while I really don't want to be a community with walls around all of our properties. 6-foot walls around all of our properties does not seem like the community we want to live in. So for me, it's this specific wall and the way it is and where it's located and what it impacted that I am okay with leaving it. But I agree with Trustee Barrow. I really am troubled that we do have this, it concerns me that it's easier to see if you can get away with it. And I don't saying you did that, but I just worry that we set this feeling of like, well, maybe it'll be okay. Maybe because I built it already, it's hard to take down. So I just think that concerns me.
And to follow up on what Trustee Jaya said, it is the location of this wall. Were this wall adjacent to another property owner, I think I would say take it down. That said, I'm not convinced that, frankly, the walls are terribly worse than 6-foot 6-inch stockade fences between neighbors, which we seem to allow all the time. That said, I would leave this wall up because of its location, and I think this should be addressed in the next, when we think about penalties for nonconformance.
So I really am troubled because it's becoming more of an issue all the time. That people build things without a permit and then figure we won't make them take it down because it's really hard to ask people to take something down. It seems wasteful. It seems expensive, probably is expensive. But I don't want to keep setting a precedent that says, well, people are going to probably let you keep it because it's really hard for them to tell you to take it down.
I just think that, yes, some of these issues come before us because they don't have a variance and they did it without a permit.
Like this one.
But before this one, it's been at least 8 months, 9 months, a year since we had one before. And when you take into account, I remember the one with the house where they built it too high. The entire house was too high on Vista Drive, but I thought that was a year ago. But I guess my point is there are so many permits issued daily, right, that we don't ever see. That doesn't even count what's on the consent agenda. That's just what, happens on a daily basis. I don't know that this is a crisis. I know that we know about that, and we certainly have a right to be concerned about it, but I don't know that there's a trend. We could obviously, that's not the data I have. I don't know that this is a serious issue in our village.
Well, and I've listened to people say that they'd rather have a wall in some ways aesthetically than a stockade fence, and I understand that. But I can also imagine that walls, when they deteriorate, are probably a much greater danger to neighboring property in the alley than a fence would be. If a fence is decrepit, you can just push it over. But a wall is going, if that wall that's right on the edge of the alley starts to crumble into the alley, we've got a problem. And so I'm not convinced that walls are better and that we should say it's perfectly okay to have a wall in any location. There probably is a very good reason that we set them back from the property line, and that's not just the we don't like walls thing. I think it's also that they probably pose a hazard if they deteriorate that a fence does not.
I don't know if that's been a consideration. I know Mr. Adler talked about vegetation. We didn't have a conversation about walls deteriorating. I understand your point, but I don't know if that was a factor in what staff was determining a wall could do when it's too close to the neighbor's property. And
well, we do have a different setback rule for fences and walls.
Right, because of vegetation. I believe that's the purpose. But that aside, this is a larger issue, and maybe this is an issue that land use wants to review again. But I think for now, we might kind of want to see where we are. But I didn't want to stop you, Trustee Shepherd.
Yeah, it's definitely come out weird. I'd be a negative on this because we have a rule, there are walls. I wouldn't have seen a hardship for that. I'd be open to land use opening up whether or not we allow walls on the alley, because I can see that. But yeah, I don't see going back in time why I would have accepted it at that point.
Taking down a wall is a big deal. I think. I want to echo what Trustee Jaya and Trustee Barrow said about the location of this wall. But I don't know, Trustee Sullivan, you haven't said anything yet?
Well, we're taking this in pieces, and I think we're avoiding the inevitable of are we going to have them take it out and where are we going to find them? This thing has been a cluster to get us to this point. I think they could have done a lot of this without a lot of these variations. And so we're in a situation where this has become a mess. It's nice, And everybody likes nice, but that's not what our code is. There's other our code is to avoid variations, and so we're here. I don't like the wall. I think we've turned down, I know we turned down one, and I can't remember, John, exactly when, but it was on Illinois. I think it was Illinois and Grant. They wanted to build that because that was a busy, and we said no to that. It may be a fence.
I think it was a
But
fence.
but we avoid the walled off, because we are a community of neighbors, and this probably would not have gotten through had it come before us, or it would have been different, so it wouldn't have been an impact to anybody else. So, that said, we're gonna have to make the hard call. We're gonna have them take it down. That's gonna be a costly one.
Well, I guess it's where I'm trying to.
That's where I think we just get to the point of,
And
I'll defer to my colleagues on what you guys want to do.
Well, I mean, recognizing that it's going to be expensive if we require that they dismantle it, it's going to be expensive for them. That would surely factor into how much you want to fine them, since they're already
Right.
paying the price. I certainly wouldn't have them take stuff down like a wall and then say, and we want $21,000.
Well, I think if we're not allowing the wall and we're not allowing the extension of the patio and we've already permitted the garages, then there's really nothing left. I mean,
The garages, they got
well,
400
but
square feet of garage.
we permitted them. I
Yes,
mean,
correct.
So, I mean,
But it has a value to them nonetheless.
but I think a fine imposed is really about the wall. I mean, this is the biggest thing here. And I mean, in my mind, this wall does not have that much more impact than a solid 6-foot fence in this location. And I think the wall on the alley does not impact any neighbors. And it's not, as Trustee Jaya said, the length of the property. It's just spanning the distance between those two garages. So, it's a partial wall. Trustee Sad?
I can make it. I support it. I'm not going to make them take it. I would
support it
support
as well.
not making them take it down and ripping it out. It is what it is. I think I would support leaving it as is and come up with some
Me
fine.
too.
And try and message as best we can to not build without a permit, but we've been saying it for years and people are going to do it. So I know as much as we want to take it down and all of that, but so I would support this and come up with some fine amount.
And
So if
I
you
would,
want
I
my-
would
my
agree with
case,
that.
Since I went
I mean,
first,
I think if you drive down, I hear what Trustee Sullivan's saying, but if you drive down down the alleys, I don't see a whole lot of difference between a wall and maybe that's something we need to look at in a fence. So in this situation, given what it looks like, I can be comfortable with allowing them to keep it as well.
Okay, so
So I can give in, if there's a good hefty fine, because I am really concerned about this. And I'll tell you, it was my recollection, and I watched the Land Use Committee meeting too on tape, whatever they call it these days. Someone said that they had a fence permit, and that's clearly not true.
You mean the zoning board of appeals meeting?
zoning
Yes.
board, right, okay.
We've got just a whole bunch of weird, unfortunate things going on here. And it's really hard to settle, to parse out what the facts are, how much of it's deliberate, how much of it's accidental, who's making the mistakes. It's obviously a mistake to be your own general contractor. I've learned that from being on this board, because you don't know what you're doing, and you make mistakes like this.
Okay.
But
So I would say, that's why I asked about Leamington or whatever it was, because I remember that, and I was probably feeling the same way you're feeling about this and knowing, okay, what's really happened here versus
Yeah.
let's just get to the, and we came up with a fine.
So it sounds like we have our consensus
Okay.
on the application, and I think a fine discussion is separate, and maybe I can turn it over to Mr. Stein, but.
Before we do that, can I just summarize and make sure I got everything here?
Right.
We're okay with basically everything except for the patio.
except what?
The patio.
Yes.
All the variations except for those that relate to the patio, which will be reduced. I'm not going to try into calculations.
Are we going to
here.
vote on these separately?
No, I don't think you need to. I think I have general direction. And what I think the plan would be, if okay, I think we would table this till the next meeting so I can actually revise the ordinance to address the changes here today.
Okay.
But with that's a delay of a month then, and
Oh,
it seems
sure.
like for the applicant, that might be,
The applicant, I think, will indicate that they will change the application to remove the patio variation. So they'll remove the variation for the patio, they'll reduce it to 138 square feet is what the applicant, I think.
And I think that's great, that really saves a little bit of a headache, but at the same point, I still need to draft the ordinance
Right, yeah.
to make sure it's appropriately given the rights that they want. Is a month too long? Is the applicant?
It's done.
Yeah, we'll be okay.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the ordinance itself. Now, I mean, in my experience, it has not been the board who has assessed the fine, but we've given the authority to the village attorney and the village manager to negotiate a settlement
Yes.
with the applicant.
That is the way it's operated with, again, with those three weird exceptions.
Okay. And those exceptions went to land use committee, but that is not the norm.
And the land use, it's not the norm, and the land use committee, and the same as me, is I can only offer a settlement. I can't say, this is what the fine is, and you must pay it, or you're not going to get anything. If you say, no, we're going to trial, and the fines are going to go way up, but that's different. It's the same, it's a recommendation, it's the same thing that I would give as a recommendation, and an offer to settle is actually under the authority of my authority in the village code to settle these cases.
So absent some direction from either this board or the land use committee, how would you begin to come up with a number?
Well, I think we look at past practice. I think we look, again, at the willfulness / volume of the violation. I think we look at the length of the violation, and we find, in this particular case, in my mind, it's somewhere in the middle of obviously $21,000 and the $1,000 or $2,000 they paid. There's also the additional costs that have to be imposed. That would be the permit fees and the surcharge permit fees. So honestly, is there an actual mathematical formula? It's the same way a judge sentences anybody. My offer would be something along the lines of most likely $5,000 in this. On top of, in addition, there would also be the other fees and fines, which would probably bring it close to like $6,500 out of pocket.
I have no idea whether that's,
It's close to
correct or
7 days worth of
reasonable.
violations based on the maximum amount, give or take a couple hundred. And while we can go all the way up to 50,000, because there's clearly enough space to do that, it's in line with the practice of these types of, this type of violation, the length of this violation. We have a $25,000 fine on another property right now out of adjudication because it's a little bit more willful. A lot of ignoring staff, and including myself, which doesn't go well. This gentleman did come, apply, did show, well, maybe I got caught, I can ask for forgiveness. It's a little bit better than turning your nose up at everybody too. So there's a balancing act. That, again, you can direct me otherwise, but I think that would be where I would land,
So are we?
even without any input from the village.
Right.
Without any input from the village.
Do we need a motion to direct you to do this, or are we just kind of asking you to do it? And is this something that we end up approving, or is this off of our?
No, so the standard method, the real standard method, and what the village code allows for is just for me to do it without, and with the village manager, without any input or direction from the village board. That's the way we normally operate. If you wanted to deviate from that, meaning you want to send it to land use, or you want to direct me with a particular number, that needs a motion.
I don't think we want to be doing that.
Okay. I mean,
I think we
normally
wanna-
the village board does not enforce our ordinances.
No, that's staff's job.
Okay.
So then why in other instances have permit cases like this gone to the land use committee?
So the last one was 2016, and I wasn't the corporation counsel.
Oh, good.
So
Good answer.
I do not know. That's what I would testify in under oath.
And you're
That's why we've got a
comfortable with
corporate
this
counsel right now.
responsibility.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Right.
You're comfortable with this responsibility.
I do it every day, and you guys don't necessarily know about it. So yes, I'm very comfortable.
Well, and Trustee Barrow, prior to 2016, we didn't have administrative adjudication, so our internal processes are different now, or we would have to take a fine if it wasn't a settlement to circuit court at the time.
I think I'm really quite comfortable with that. I really don't know that we need to have the land use committee or any other committee weigh in on the kind of factors that you've just described.
Mr. Stein, do you take into account the fact that we do need a kind of deterrence for others and that fines, if they're too low, aren't deterrents? They're just the cost of doing business?
Absolutely. So fines are a punishment, and punishment's meant to do a couple of things. It's meant to punish the behavior and to stop recidivism and to discourage others from doing that behavior. I absolutely do take that into account. I do think that our surcharge may be a little bit too low, and that's not even a fine. That's an automatic cost, and that's probably something that ComDev and Director and I will discuss offline, because I think that may address the situation. But absolutely, I mean, $5,000 is in my opinion is not an insignificant amount of money to come out of someone's pocket. I don't know. We could take it down for cheaper though.
All right, so we have general consensus that if a fine is to be issued in this case, it'll be handled by Corporation Counsel and Village Manager. Okay, so are you suggesting that we table this until our next Village Board meeting to vote on the motion?
Yes, because I there's some rather complicated and tricky calculations that need to be done that's not in the ordinance, and I want to make sure that those are all done and correct. And you're going to have to eventually vote on an ordinance, so I don't want to vote on something that's incorrect tonight.
Okay, so we need a motion to table.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second, Trustee Jaya. Is this a roll call vote?
You can do a voice vote for
A voice
tabling.
vote for tabling? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And since there's consensus, we'll put that ordinance on the consent agenda for that next meeting.
So that will be, you don't have to argue your case anymore. We appreciate it. I know it's been
Unless someone calls it.
a lot of your time. So, thank you.